Ай, бля, жарко, жарко, жарко.
This is Tambov, the logistical heart of Russia, just 400 kilometers south of Moscow. These panic-filled images reflected on social media brought the war to Putin's doorstep. That massive train, carrying tons of fuel and considered the army's lifeline, mysteriously derailed and turned into a massive inferno in seconds. The horror of the incident isn't just the flames. The real horror is the timing. The air in Russia is already thick as lead. The people are grappling with one of the worst fuel crises in history. There are miles-long shortage queues at gas stations. Electricity is cut off in homes frozen solid. Millions of Russians are in the dark. Just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, the explosion of the Kilit railway station in the heart of the city was the last straw for the Russian people. The governor's office hastily claims it was a technical malfunction. However, the signs on the ground, the nature of the explosion, and intelligence reports whisper one word: sabotage. When we examine the technical anatomy of the incident, the picture that emerges points to much more than an accident. It signals a fatal fracture in the Russian Federation's logistics infrastructure. The epicenter of the explosion was the strategic Kochetovka 2 station in the Tambov region. This is not a random point on the map, but a massive junction that functions as a main artery. The main lines coming from Moscow converge here. From here, they branch out south to Voronezh, Rostov, and from there directly to the occupied territory in Ukraine, the Donbass front. Although it looks like a civilian station, it is actually a massive military transit hub. Satellite data and images obtained from local sources clearly show the extent of the destruction at the station. An area of 1,000 square meters has been completely reduced to ashes. 11 gasoline tanks and 5 gas tanks burned. Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations and the local governor's office hastily dismissed the incident as a derailment and attempted to cover it up. However, OSINT data from the field debunks this narrative. The simultaneous explosion of 11 gasoline tankers and 5 gas tankers in a chain reaction indicates a coordinated effect or a breakdown in a chain of systemic negligence beyond a simple mechanical failure. The fact that 2 special firefighting trains and 25 emergency teams were unable to extinguish this fire for hours is indisputable proof that the cargo being transported was not civilian fuel, but high-octane military fuel. The Kremlin is trying to calm its people by calling the Tambov incident a technical failure. But the realities behind the scenes reveal the inadequacy of Putin's security. Right now in Russia, there is a civil war going on that state television never shows and Putin never mentions. It is called the War of the Rails. In 2025 alone, more than 50 major railway sabotage incidents were reported across Russia. In Bryansk, Belgorod, Rostov, and now Tambov. It is not always Ukrainian special forces who are responsible. Sometimes it is an angry railway worker who has not been paid. Sometimes it's a father who lost his son in the war. Sometimes it's ordinary Russian youth who hate the Putin regime and join groups like the Fire Movement or the Legion of Russia's Freedom. Look at the messages spreading on social media right after the Tambov incident. Damn Russian logistics! This is an outburst of anger. So how do these groups operate? These are not partisans hiding in the forests like in World War II. This is guerrilla warfare in the digital age. The system is based entirely on distributed network logic. There is no central headquarters or chain of command. Instead, there are independent cells of 2 to 5 people, unaware of each other, communicating only through encrypted applications. While one cell is placing explosives on the tracks in Tambov, another cell in Moscow is promoting the action. This cellular structure reduces the risk of capture to 0. Even if one is caught, they cannot give up the others because they do not know them. So how are targets selected? This is the most frightening part. The attacks are not random. Targets are identified using Google Earth, current satellite images, and leaked train schedules. One cell captures drone images of the target area. Another processes this data and draws up the attack map. They target the regime's softest underbelly, unprotected fuel trains, strategic railroad switches, and power lines. That fuel train in Tambov wasn't hit by chance as it passed through. They knew what the train was carrying, what time it would pass, and which part of the line had no cameras. Railways are a perfect target for saboteurs. It is impossible to protect Russia's 85,000-kilometer railway network. You cannot station a soldier every meter. A bottle of gasoline is enough to burn a relay box. A simple piece of metal is enough to derail a train. The cost is close to zero, but the impact is millions of dollars. According to CSIS analysis, such actions slow down Russia's logistics by 10 to 15%. A 15% loss in logistics in war means the halt of an offensive on the front lines. However, saboteurs are not the only cause of the fire in Tambov. Perhaps the bigger culprit is the system itself. Russian Railways, with 800,000 employees, is Russia's largest employer. But today, RZD, like those burning carriages, is on the verge of collapse. The war has turned RZD into a zombie company. It is also possible that the train that derailed in Tambov overturned due to a technical malfunction. Do you know why? Because Russian trains are cracking. Most of the cars and locomotives in RZD's fleet date back to the Soviet era. The maintenance parts for modern trains, bearings, electronic signaling systems, all of them used to come from the West. But now they are gone. The critical shortage of qualified personnel is turning the technical failure into self-destruction, because Putin drafted railway workers into the army. Technicians, engineers, signaling experts. They are not driving trains in Tambov now, they are dying in the trenches of Ukraine. The accident in Tambov is the result of this chain of negligence. Perhaps a saboteur planted the bomb, but it is the Kremlin's distorted management approach that created the security gaps, put the neglected carriages on the tracks, and paved the way for that bomb to explode. That column of black smoke rising into the sky in Tambov is not just a local environmental disaster. It is a harbinger of a deadly silence that will begin 500 kilometers away at the front line. To understand the strategic weight of this event, we must face the reality of the Russian army's railway dependency. Unlike NATO armies, Russian military logistics are dependent not on flexible truck fleets or air supply, but on rigid and cumbersome railway networks at a rate of 90%. A Russian tank brigade can travel no more than 60 to 90 kilometers from a railway junction. Once it exceeds this distance, truck fleets become insufficient, and the pace of the offensive grinds to a halt. When the Tambov-Kochetovka line is cut, it does not simply cause a delay, it triggers a massive domino effect. The 16 tanker trucks full of fuel that burned that night were destined for the depots of the T-90 tanks awaiting attack orders in front of Chasiv Yar, the armored personnel carriers pushing the Pokrovsk line, and the trucks pulling artillery batteries. Now those depots are empty, and in modern warfare, a tank that runs out of fuel is no different from a pile of scrap worth millions of dollars, a steel coffin for its crew. When fuel doesn't arrive, engines fall silent, generators stop, thermal cameras and electronic warfare systems go offline. This disruption fundamentally undermines the Russian army's firepower cylinder doctrine. Russia aims to advance with intense artillery fire and armored pressure, regardless of troop losses. However, the explosion in Tambov is a giant wrench thrown into the gears of this cylinder. Russian commanders on the front lines are now forced to ration fuel in a panic. For a commander to ration fuel means halting the evacuation of the wounded, reducing ammunition resupply, and cancelling planned offensives. This is strangulation in its purest form. Even more alarming is the timing of this logistical shock. At a time when winter conditions are worsening and mud and snow are making the terrain difficult, the stalling of engines also brings with it the risk of freezing and hypothermia. Fuel is not only vital for movement, but also for the soldiers' survival, warmth, and morale. The severing of the logistics line sends this message to Russian soldiers in the trenches. No one is behind you. You have been forgotten. This psychological breakdown is far more destructive than physical ammunition shortages and sows the seeds of insubordination within the army. The fire in Tambov is triggering chaos that is also spreading to Russia's civilian economy. When the railway lines were closed to clear military debris and repair the line, civilian trade, food shipments, and passenger transport also halted. Queues have already begun to form at gas stations in southern Russia, and prices have started to rise. There is a rule in railway logistics. If a train explodes on the main line, it's not just that train that stops. Hundreds of trains behind it stop. Ammunition trains wait. Food trains wait. This explosion in Tambov has the capacity to paralyze the logistics flow to Russia's southern front for hours, even days. Even if the deputy governor says traffic has resumed, railway experts know that it will take weeks for those tracks and signaling systems to return to their former state after the explosion. This is the logic of sabotage. You destroy a train, but you actually leave an entire front open. Although the Kremlin is trying to keep the war on Ukrainian soil, the severing of logistical arteries directly injects the cost of the war into the pockets and daily lives of Russian citizens. Currently, the Russian army's rate of advance in Ukraine varies between 15 and 70 meters per day on average. This snail's pace, slower even than the trench warfare of World War I, is at risk of shutting down completely with the severing of vital arteries like Tambov. While Putin's generals draw arrows on maps, the fuel to move those arrows has turned into black smoke over the Tambov plain and mixed into the atmosphere. Logistical math doesn't lie. If there is no input, there is no output. And right now, the input is in flames. The Tambov incident is more than a tactical success. It is a geostrategic turning point. The illusion of the security wall, upon which Putin built his power, collapsed along with the flames at the Kochetovka station. The narrative sold to the Russian people for years, the special military operation is far away, you are safe, is now in tatters. The war is no longer being fought on the steppes of Donbass, it is being fought in Tambov, Belgorod, Tula, in the industrial heartland and logistical backbone of Russia. This attack is a strategic checkmate move, demonstrating that the Russian state has lost its most fundamental function, the capacity to protect its own territory and infrastructure. Russia has a vast geography of 17 million square kilometers and an 85,000-kilometer railway network connecting this geography. However, this size is no longer a strength, but an indefensible weakness. Ukrainian intelligence and pro-freedom partisans within Russia have proven that every point in this vast network can be a target. While the Russian army has piled all its air defense systems and security forces onto the Ukrainian border to hold the front line, it has left its backyard completely defenseless, a soft underbelly. Moscow now faces an insoluble dilemma, a deadly paradox. Either withdraw the air defense systems and security battalions from the front to protect the railways, sacrificing its frontline soldiers to Ukrainian fire, or continue to reinforce the front, watching as logistics centers like Tambov are blown up one by one. Both options are a disaster for the Kremlin. Both paths lead to devastation. This incident also deepens the psychological dimension of the theme, the war comes to Russia's doorstep. What the people of Tambov saw from their windows was not a drill, it was the cold, burning breath of war. The panic spreading through local telegram channels outpaced the censorship apparatus. People saw that the state could not protect them, that even strategic facilities were not safe. This feeling of insecurity is spreading like a virus through the lower strata of society. Workers are afraid to drive their trains. Station chiefs are shirking responsibility. The regime's authority is being eroded by flames and fear. The Tambov sabotage also exposes how hollow Russia's great power status has become. A superpower that threatens the world with nuclear weapons and challenges NATO is incapable of protecting a train on its own soil. This is the wiping out of diplomatic and military prestige. Allies China and Iran are taking note of Russia's impotence. Its enemies see this vulnerability as an invitation for deeper and more destructive blows. Russia has created a security black hole within its own borders. This hole will continue to grow until it swallows the regime's future. The black smoke rising from the Tambov station is not only the funeral pyre of burning fuel, but also of Putin's dreams of victory. The immutable law of logistics ruled once again that night. Armies march on their stomachs, but tanks fight on fuel. The artery severed at Tambov is the jugular vein of the Russian soldier at the front. Russia's seemingly endless resources are being depleted by its own incompetence and the fire of resistance within. What burned in Kochetovka were not just wagons, but the Kremlin's promise of stability. That promise is now nothing but a lie. its ashes scattered to the wind. The message is clear. There is no longer any safe place within Russia. Logistics have collapsed, and the war has returned to where it began, the heart of Russia.